So we're back here at the Web 2.0 Summit, and I have with me someone who knows a thing or two about tech conferences. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So how are technology media events changing as we come to the end of 2011?
Yeah, we were just talking about this before the cameras rolled. I think we're starting to experiment with conferences in the way that technology is really used in an innovative fashion. So let's call it the UI, the user interface. We're starting to think through the way conferences work in a similar vein. So part of that is the infusion of technology itself. We can bring in Twitter and Facebook and the social graph in an interactive way in the actual conversation and dialogue that goes on during a conference, and that's one piece of it. But I think the other piece is the pacing and the format. One of the things that is always true about any content business is the power is in the content. That's really what it is. But how do you illuminate it? And one of the things about conferences that makes them work really well is we learn by hearing the story and the narrative and the journey of whether it's Mark Benioff or Sean Parker or John Donahoe. These are extraordinary people, but what we want to hear is a little bit of their story and their journey as human beings, and that's the narrative we learn from, as opposed to a PowerPoint presentation that we just don't really learn much from hearing a bunch of facts recited over a series of slides.
Well, you see people being able to access a lot of these PowerPoint decks on their own, right, through SlideShare, through other services. So what's the now value add for coming in person to a conference?
Yeah, I think what it is exactly what you and I are doing right now. It's the physical interaction. The idea of community engagement has long been the benefit that you get out of live media. And I think what's ironic, but perhaps maybe it shouldn't be ironic to us, is that the rise of social media, we've seen a corresponding rise with live media. So the more we interact socially online, the more we ultimately want to get together. And whether that get together is at the conference itself, or in follow-up, I think what's happening is people are realizing, they can view a conference like this, or TED Talks. We were talking about that a few minutes ago. We're live casting the conference here, and every bit of it goes out on the live cast. We started doing that last year. Immediately, as soon as we turned the camera on, we had some 2,000 people that immediately logged on via the live cast. Well, that's now moving around the internet. At the end of the day, if you see some content that was compelling, what you're really going to want to do is the next time we host Web 2 Summit, you're going to want to sign up and come to it. And we see that repeated over and over. The reason that most people know about TED Talks is not because they've actually been to the TED conference. It's because they've seen them online, and what it does is create a certain level of pent-up demand for people to want to attend.
Now, the shift in media through all the platforms you just mentioned, certainly Twitter and Facebook being out there is the ones we were talked about the most, but there's no shortage of other social platforms evolving. And now that's become a two-way conversation. Conferences traditionally have been a really one-way. Someone's up on stage talking to you. How is that dynamic that people are expecting as they consume media being able to reciprocally communicate being transferred to the conference world?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not unlike when we first saw the impact of the read-write web, right? So we grew up with the read-only web, and that was pretty straightforward. It was just publishing in a different model, and all of a sudden when they started to talk back to us, we thought, wait a second, this is really kind of interesting. I think what you have to do is you have to create a bit more breathing room. And if you notice the format that we use here, we go to questions early in the discussion. So most of the sessions, the content sessions, are very small. It's one person interviewing another person, and relatively quickly we start allowing questions from the audience, because we want to get a certain level of a conversational tone to it, but we also want the audience here to actively engage. What you hope is the audience that's here live is a bit of a proxy for the audience that's following online, but the other advantage we have now is we can monitor the conversation online. So many of us you see sitting in the first few rows are not only monitoring the tweet stream, we're managing it, but we're also signaling John and Tim and some of the folks that are on stage when they come off stage of the kind of feedback we're getting, the kind of questions people are posing, the kind of reactions people are having. And it allows us to bring that real-time reaction to some of the content into the experience itself, which we think benefits both the live audience and the audience that's viewing it online.
Can you get it to them actually while they're on stage? So the sentiment analysis says it's turning ugly. Can you tell them right away?
We certainly can, and we've experimented with that. You may have read about, we have a companion event to this called Web 2 Expo, and we produce it both here in San Francisco and in New York. And as the name would allow, it's both a focused summit conference, but then a larger exhibition. And we had a speaker that was on stage. We had the tweet stream behind her.
Yes,
and
Dana Boyd famously. Right?
You remember this story. And they got, as people wrote it up later, tweeted off stage. And so we're sort of careful how we use that. So we can communicate with John or Tim, and certainly when they came off and they go to the green room, they can look at what the Twitter stream is reflecting. We're a little careful about how to do that in real time so it becomes distracting. Right. So you and I are having a focused conversation. If somebody's signaling us off camera here, it would be distracting to the conversation, and in turn potentially distracting to the people viewing this. So we want to be careful about it. But the implication of your question is that these are things that are getting increasingly embedded in a live media experience, and they will go from our being slightly awkward in using them to more natural in using them, I think.
So last question. What's next for conferences next year? There's still going to be space over time for these big events, or are we going to see sort of a lot of experimentation with different models, something in between? What do you expect to happen?
I think all the above,
okay.
Right? So if you think about the ultimate scarcity in a fragmented media world is to do what we're doing here today, where you have a large number of high demographic people in one spot at one time. We've all got things we could do with our time. We've all got things we could do with our money. And yet, the ability to do that is getting harder and harder and harder. So where you can do that, obviously it has extraordinary value for both attendee and the producer of those kinds of events. I think you're going to see continued experimentation in niche events, birds of a feather, where there's a very focused agenda, and they might be relatively small in nature. I think you'll see a further experimentation in events like this, what I would term as a mid-size event. And we're seeing, you might be somewhat surprised by we're seeing a massive amount of growth in our largest events. So things like the Game Developer Conference with 25,000 people, our Interop trade show and conference, again, 20,000 plus people. But I think it cuts back to what we've been saying, is the content is what really attracts people to that. The ability to interact with their peers and engage in and around that content. And in a fragmented media world, the scarcity of being able to do that in one place at one time is very, very difficult. So I think you'll actually see continued interest in those models. Hopefully producers like ours will continue to innovate in those areas and continue to see those businesses grow.
All right, there it is. So more of the same and a little bit of the new mixed in.
I think so.
I
think so.
Well, thank you. So that was someone as you should know from TechWeb. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yep, appreciate it.